Howdy folks, CFI Dawson here. Today we're going to talk about how to actually obtain a private pilot license. So there are many different licenses you can obtain in aviation under the FAA regulations, our Federal Aviation Administration, which is the regulatory body in the United States. Anything that can hurl ourselves up into the air and bring us back down in one piece is categorized by the FAA. I'm rated as an instructor and a pilot to fly fixed-wing aircraft. So we're going to talk about obtaining a private pilot license in the category that I know best, which is the airplane category, and we're just going to talk about land-rated aircraft for now. So the first real step that I usually advise people in obtaining a private pilot license, whether that's single-engine land or multi-engine land, would be to take a discovery flight. So if you've never flown in an aircraft, especially a small airplane before, you want to see if it's really something that you're worth investing time and money into before we get deeper into this thing, before you get deeper into your flight training. Maybe you schedule a medical or you schedule to take your written exam, but you've never flown in what's called a GA airplane or a general aviation aircraft, usually a very small plane. Most flight training is done in 2 to 4 passenger airplanes, either low or high wing. The most common of those trainers are the Piper Archer, or also known as the Piper Cherokee. It's a 4-seater, single engine, low wing airplane. And then the second, or the first most common trainer is probably the Cessna 172. So it's also a 4-seater general aviation airplane that's single engine, and it has high wings. So after you schedule your discovery flight, you'll end up flying most likely in one of those 2 airplanes, either a Cessna 172 or Cessna type aircraft that's a high wing, or a low wing aircraft like a Piper Archer or a Cherokee. Once you go up for your first discovery flight, your instructor will let you sometimes do the takeoff, and especially once you get up to altitude, they're going to say your controls. And then at that point, that's your opportunity to take the controls and learn how to fly. Flying is very intuitive. It's very much kind of like driving a car. Once you get in the air, you turn your ailerons to the left, or the yoke to the left. That moves the ailerons, which causes the aircraft to bank or turn to the left. Same thing to the right. You turn the yoke, which moves the ailerons. That will bank the aircraft to the right. So in the same thing in a car, when we have our steering wheel, we turn the steering wheel to the left, we go to the left. We turn the steering wheel to the right, we go to the right. Well, there's some added complexity to it as well, because we're no longer driving just on a 2D plane where we go left and right. Now we're on a 3D plane where we go left, right, up and down, and we're on what's called a vertical axis. So anytime we turn, we have to use the addition of our feet to counteract something that's called adverse yaw, which is a principle of flight characteristics or flight aerodynamics that hopefully you'll learn about if you decide to become a pilot and obtain your private pilot license. So step 1 is to get into a plane and go for a discovery flight and see if it's really something you want to do. I've observed 3 outcomes that tend to be most common with people when I take them up for a discovery flight. If they've never flown before, they either get behind the yoke of the aircraft and we take them up in the air and they've got this huge smile on their face from the time we take off to the time when they land. And they know this is something they want to do. They're absolutely committed to it. They've been bitten by the bug of aviation. The second is I take somebody up and they're really interested on the ground. Maybe they're obsessed with the movie Top Gun, or they're obsessed with some type of aviation movie or aviation influence in their life. And then they get in the airplane and it's not exactly what they were thinking. It kind of throws them off a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit of motion sickness. Maybe we actually throw up in a bag, or hopefully it's in a bag so no one has to clean it up. And they don't have, an entirely positive experience, and they decide that the physiological factor of them throwing up or the motion sickness is not exactly something that they want to continue. And flight training is not for them. Maybe they want to look into a different aspect of aviation, like maybe teaching ground, or they look into air traffic control, or different other occupations where you can be involved in aviation, but maybe you're not directly an aviator or a pilot. Third is somebody who has an interest in aviation, and they're like, okay, I might be interested in this, and they go up and they don't have a negative physiological response, but it's not quite what they had envisioned. Maybe it's more work to actually fly an airplane. A lot of people think, even at the commercial airline level, that pilots just take off and then we just sit back here and daydream and look up at the sky. But there's a lot of work throughout the flight. Even if you do have a nice autopilot like most airliners do, there's a lot of work throughout the flying. Even if you're not hand flying the airplane, you're constantly taking radio calls, you're constantly looking out for traffic, you're constantly programming different systems in the aircraft, you're maintaining systems, maintaining fuel, maintaining temperature of the aircraft engines. There's a lot of work that goes into being a pilot. It's not all just fun and games, as sometimes it seems to be in the media, or if we're watching YouTube or we're watching movies. It's not all the fun and games a lot of times that it's portrayed as. So that's the 3 different reactions that I see when I take people up for a discovery flight. So we've scheduled our discovery flight, and let's say we had a positive experience. We got bit by the bug, and now we're really interested in seeing how far this can go. If you really do want to obtain that private pilot license, what's the next step? Step number 2 is scheduling a medical exam. So I'm hoping before you took the discovery flight, there was a little bit of a thought, okay, what is my health condition? But sometimes there are some hidden things that we don't always know about ourselves, and that's when the medical exam comes in. The FAA does require that you obtain at least a 3rd class medical certificate to obtain a private pilot license for the first time. You obtain this medical certificate by going to what is called an AME, or an Aircraft Medical Examiner. This AME is a designated doctor that the FAA has certificated and are essentially allowed to be able to conduct these medical exams for mostly civilian pilots who are interested in obtaining a certificate for flight through the FAA, like a private pilot license. It's often called a private pilot license, but really it's a private pilot certificate. I'm looking now at the Code of Federal Regulations, published by both the U.S. government and in partnership with the FAA, and under Part 61.102 for applicability and Part 61.103 eligibility requirements to obtain a private pilot certificate. The FAA clearly states here that it is a certificate in order to access or exercise the privileges of a private pilot. So you've scheduled an exam with your AME, or your aviation medical examiner, nearby you, and you've gotten at least that 3rd class medical, and you meet the qualifications, and you've passed that 3rd class medical. Now we can move on to some of the hour and ground requirements that are necessary in order to obtain that private pilot certificate. So step 3 is actually to find a flight school. So you probably already found the flight school in my step 1, which was booking a discovery flight. If you haven't, you can always go around to other flight schools in your area. I always say hit up Google as your first source for this. Flight schools are businesses. They're outward facing just like any other service provider, just like a taxi cab service or a photography service, or whatever service that you might need. On the rare occasion, people go to Google. So flight schools are aware of this. They usually have well-maintained websites and emails and phone numbers that are easily accessible on those websites. If you did not enjoy your first discovery flight with a flight school, or the first discovery flight you had wasn't with a flight school, reach out to different flight schools in your area, and then also you could reach out to different independent instructors in your area. After you've found a CFI at either a local flight school or an independent CFI, then you can move on to start your flight training. So we're going to start doing both ground training, and we're going to start working toward learning how to fly the aircraft on your own, so that you can reach the first big milestone in obtaining a private pilot certificate, which is soloing the aircraft. So taking the aircraft up completely by yourself and then getting it back down in one piece completely by yourself. So you've logged a couple hours, maybe we're like 3 to 5 hours in, and we know we want to take this seriously. Now we have to work on studying for the FAA written exam, or the written as it's often called. The FAA requires that you take a written multiple choice exam. You'll be able to find a local testing center. Usually you might even have to drive an hour or two to get to that local testing center. Local, we could say in quotation marks, because sometimes it's a little farther than what we would actually deem as local. But you'll schedule that exam. You'll go in. It's a multiple choice test. It's usually about 65 questions. It is a proctored exam. It is not open note, and you're required to make at least a 70% on the exam to pass the test. Hopefully we make a little bit better, because for a future note, when you take your private pilot check ride, which is the final step in obtaining the private pilot certificate, whatever score that you obtained on that written test can really help you in the check ride. So before we do the flight portion of the check ride, there's what's called the oral portion, or the ground portion of the check ride, where the designated pilot examiner, the DPE, will ask you questions before you even get to the airplane. A lot of those questions are based on the questions that you've already demonstrated a lack of proficiency in, or you missed questions on the written exam. Your flight instructor will have to go over each individual question that you missed on the exam, that category of area, and then give you an endorsement saying that you are proficient in the areas that were deficient during the written exam. So the better score we make on that written, the easier it will be in the future for us to obtain that private pilot certificate during the check ride portion of getting your ratings. So we've taken the written exam. We've done well. We got an 85%. That's a great score. We'll keep moving from there. We already talked about the first big milestone in obtaining that certificate is to do your first solo. That solo time is very important because you'll actually end up needing a total of 10 hours of solo time to meet your total of 40 total hours of flight training required. So we've got 10 hours of solo time. We got 40 hours of total flight time training that'll be required. 20 hours of that training must be from an authorized instructor. So a CFI, someone like me, has to be in the aircraft with you at least 20 hours of giving you flight training, which is called dual received on your behalf. And then on my behalf, it's called dual given. There are several other flight requirements, such as there are 10 takeoff and landings, night currency requirements, 5 hours of cross-country, several different things in the regulations that can be found in Part 61-109 for your private pilot certificate aeronautical experience requirements. You and your instructor will be able to review that before your check ride and make sure that you've met all of the requirements to obtain the private pilot certificate. Once you've met the FAA minimum of the 40 hours of total flight time required, and you've met all of the other qualifications of dual received, your solo time, your cross-country time, night currency, then we're ready for the private pilot check ride. A DPE is somebody that has been designated by the FAA to issue private pilot certificates, and usually certificates of other classes and ratings as well, if they identify that an applicant, which would be you, meets the qualifications and the standards in what's called the ACS, so the Airman Certification Standards. That is a publication released by the FAA, and it's essentially a rubric that gives the designated pilot examiner, or in this sense, the grader, the teacher, a list of qualifications to see if you, the applicant or the pilot applicant, meet the qualifications to obtain their certificate that day, if you'll be getting your license, if you will become the world's newest private pilot, is what we like to say. So you schedule a check ride with that examiner and you go and take the aircraft, usually to them. Sometimes they come to you, and you will conduct, as we've already stated, the oral portion of the exam, which can be anywhere from an hour to sometimes as long as 6 hours, as it was for me and most certified flight instructors. But the PPL, the private pilot certificate check ride, is usually anywhere between 1 to 3 hours, again, depending upon how well you did on that written exam. Can depend on how long it goes, and then also how prepared you are. If you answer all the questions the examiner asks confidently and seem to really know your stuff, sometimes that oral portion can go a little bit shorter and things can be going great. You've set a great example, a great tone for the examiner, then that'll help you out if things aren't so great in the flight sometimes. The examiner, usually as designated by the FAA, has a fee. Sometimes I've seen it as low as $600 to $800, which is usually on the low end. And I've also seen it as high as $1,600 or even $2,000 in places like California, where there's a very high demand for DPEs. So you'll end up paying that fee for the examiner, as well as paying to rent the aircraft if you're renting it, or if you do own the aircraft, be paying for gas and fuel expenses. So there is some cost associated to the day of your check ride. So that's also good to remember. We don't want to schedule a check ride, and even worse, go to a check ride that we don't feel prepared for, because there is a huge financial investment. You've already invested usually $10,000 to $15,000 into getting this point, in paying your instructor and paying the rental aircraft fee and obtaining the different accoutrements, I like to say, as you would need to become a student pilot, whether that's an iPad or a 4-flight subscription or a nice headset or whatever other things, an E6B, an electronic E6B, and the other things, pilot accessories that you would want to have. So you've spent all this money to get here. Let's not go in hoping we might pass the check ride. Let's go into the check ride knowing we have a great chance, unless something really bad goes wrong, which is sometimes happens and sometimes things are out of our control, but we want to go in feeling really prepared for the check ride, because there is a big financial investment you've already made and a big financial investment for the day of the check ride. So we've done our oral portion of the check ride. We have done the flight portion of the check ride. We did great in both. The examiner says, okay, come back to my office and we'll print out your cert. So you'll go back to the office after your flight portion. You've done great. You're feeling all excited. The examiner will a lot of times debrief anything that maybe didn't go so well. It's something always to remember. The ground portion, the oral portion, and the flight portion, they are a test, but it's not a test where you're graded on perfection. Perfection is not the standard, as one of my former examiners has liked to said, but the ACS is usually pretty liberal with its qualifications as long as you are within the standards of the aircraft certification standards the FAA has given the examiner to grade you on, then you have the right to be issued the certificate. So you've done great. You get to be issued the certificate. He'll print off, or they'll print off, she'll print off, whomever it is will print off your temporary airman certification certificate. That temporary certificate is good for 120 days. They'll print it off. They'll ask you to sign it, and congratulations, you are the world's newest private pilot until maybe about 15 minutes when somebody across the country obtains their private pilot certificate. So it's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of money. But obtaining a private pilot certificate is something very few people do, and it is a huge accomplishment if you are able to meet that goal. And if you truly love flying, you truly love aviation like I do, then getting a certificate or even getting another certificate, I think I'm 7 in. I have a seaplane check ride scheduled next week, so all exciting. And even though sometimes there are nerves, it's all super exciting in obtaining a new certificate, even when you're this far in as I am as a flight instructor. Thanks for watching on getting some information on how to obtain your private pilot certificate, not a license. Remember, private pilot certificate, so that you can exercise the privileges of a private pilot. If you enjoyed this video and you're looking to learn more about becoming a private pilot, or maybe a commercial pilot or a CFI, or just a general interest in aviation, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel, because I'll be posting more videos as a flight instructor, giving more information about my experience as a flight instructor and my journey in aviation, and hopefully help you along your journey in aviation. CFI Dawson here. Thank you for watching.